Glasgow Airport, then CEO of Budapest Airport, and most recently MD of Stansted. Before that, he worked for Black & Decker and holds the unusual distinction of being a fellow of both the Institute of Engineering and Technology and the Chartered Institute of Marketing. He is going to present the case for Gatwick, together with its proposal for a new, fully independent runway to the south of the existing runway. Please welcome Stuart Wingate.
So good afternoon, everybody. I think I'd just like to start by just saying how delighted we are at Gatwick to be on the shortlist and to be one of the shortlisted options. Clearly, this decision that will be taken over the next year and a half is an incredibly important decision that will be made by the Aviation Commission, and it will indeed shape the future of the aviation industry in this country for the next generation. From a Gatwick perspective, we think we have an incredibly strong case, and I'm going to present that case to you today. But essentially, it hinges around competition and competing airports and competing airlines. It hinges around affordable fares to passengers. It hinges around the connectivity that people in our country will require going forwards, both to the emerging economies and long-haul destinations, but quite importantly also to the European destinations too, which account for 70% of passenger traffic. But it also hinges around the choice that we have to make in terms of the environmental impact of any runway development. And clearly the environmental impact of a runway at Gatwick is significantly lower than either of the competing options at Heathrow. So we think we have a compelling case. At Gatwick, I'm going to start by just briefly talking about the last 4 years. And the reason the last 4 years are incredibly important is in the last 4 years we've been in separate ownership. Previously, under the common ownership, Gatwick was underinvested in, and the service levels weren't really as good as they could have been. So over the last 4 years, we've come on an incredible journey. Passenger volumes have grown to record-breaking levels once more. We've grown from 31 million passengers in 2010. This year, we'll be at 35.5 million passengers, and we know already that we'll grow again next year. And that's been achieved through existing airlines growing and putting on more frequencies and more destinations, but also it's been achieved by bringing in new airlines, putting on new exciting destinations, often to the emerging economies. From a service perspective, we're now the only London airport in the upper quartile, from a service delivery perspective, of the major European airports. We've made dramatic progress in delivering better service over the last 4 years, and that's been recognised by our passengers. But we've also invested heavily in the facility. And just on the slideshow here, I've got some of the facilities that we've developed. For people who've gone through Gatwick over the last 4 years, we've got the wonderful new facilities in the North Terminal that Sir John Major opened for us a couple of years ago. We've also got the exciting news that we'll have our first daily scheduled A380 services operating from the airport from the end of March this year with Emirates. This was Emirates flying into the airport just last year with an A380. So we've developed these facilities since the change of ownership. This is the welcome that you get when you come into the South Terminal facilities with the new plaza that we put in place a couple of years ago, giving you a sense of place as you come into the South Terminal. And then, of course, there's the world-class security area that we opened about 18 months following the change of ownership, which has been award-winning across Europe. So we've done an awful lot to develop the service that we provide, to invest in the facilities, but also to attract new airlines into the airport, and indeed to encourage existing airlines to develop the frequencies and size of their services. At the same time, we've also been working incredibly hard with a range of stakeholders, particularly when it comes to surface access. And by surface access, what we really mean is helping passengers get to and from the airport. In actual fact, we've been so successful that many of the developments that are either planned or under construction today will not only serve the needs of the single runway airport, they'll actually serve the needs of the two runway airport. So if I just briefly touch on road, there are really three major road initiatives that are happening today which will certainly help the accessibility of passengers getting to and from Gatwick, particularly under that second runway scenario. The first one is the free running of the tolling on the Dartford crossing, making Gatwick a lot more accessible as people come across the Thames to the east of the city. That free tolling, the free running, will be in place as early as the end of this year. The second one is the intelligent use of the hard shoulders at the Sevenoaks Junction. This is one of the bottlenecks on the M25 to the south of the system. And for those people who live in the area, you'll have seen that the roadworks are actually happening currently. And during the course of this year, they'll be completed. And the hard shoulder running will be in place. And the capacity of the runway will be increased by an additional lane in both directions. And then if I drop down onto the M23, the spur that drops off the M25 directly into Gatwick, then before the end of the decade, likewise, the intelligent motorways will be put in place, and the additional capacity will be achieved and is planned to be achieved by the use of hard shoulder running. So from a road perspective, certainly plans are afoot, both for the existing runway and for the next runway. From a rail perspective, Gatwick is the leading airport in the country, having passengers get to and from it by rail. It's around 40% of our passengers get to and from the airport by rail, and of course we have the enormous benefit of the fact that we're actually on the main rail lines. What this means is that we connect to 120 different stations directly. I think the equivalent at Heathrow is something like 6. So you can imagine it's an enormous advantage for us. And not only do we go into Victoria with the express services to the West End, but we also go into the city. And from the change of ownership, we've worked quite hard to promote the fact that with the Thameslink, we have services that can get you to London Bridge, it can get you into Blackfriars, Farringdon, it can connect you up to St Pancras. So the rail connectivity that we enjoy isn't necessarily well understood, but it certainly is quite far-ranging. But in terms of the improvements that have taken place currently, if I start with the station, the first thing is the 7th platform, which we co-invested with Network Rail on a couple of years ago. That opens in the next couple of weeks. After that, we've got the seed corn money, which the DfT have put forward, £50 million. And actually, we're very thankful to the Commission for helping us with that. And we now hope to use that and build it into a fund of about £200 million, which will see a full-scale renovation of the rail station at Gatwick. But over and above that, we also have things like the Thameslink carriages to look forward to. Seeing the Thameslink capacity go from 8-car trains to 12-car trains, dramatically increasing the rail accessibility of Gatwick, particularly to the north of the city. We also see the tunnels being used around St Pancras, achieving direct connections to Peterborough and Cambridge, all planned. And of course, we've got the Thameslink franchise, which should mean for the Gatwick Express that we start to see better service levels and, let's hope, improved rolling stock. So from a rail perspective, Gatwick has got oodles of potential. So perhaps now we can start to narrow in onto the real discussion of the day, which is what is Gatwick's views as to where the next runway should go? Unsurprisingly, as you can see on this chart, our view is that the next runway clearly should be at Gatwick. In fact, our vision really is to move forward with the competing notion of having a network of competing airports of a similar size around the metropolis, which is London. The airports should actually serve the city. The city is not here to serve a mega hub. And if you look at the notion of the additional runway at Gatwick, because it can be delivered faster, because it can be delivered cheaper, because it serves the different modes of transportation, what our proposal promises for the next generation are affordable fares with minimal environmental impacts. Now, some people have said to me, but is this something new, Stuart? Surely everyone has a mega hub. Well, what you see here is the approach of other big world cities. And my belief is we should be very proud of our big world city in our region. All of the cities here on the slide are what I consider big world cities. And none of these cities have gone down the mega hub route. These cities have gone down the competing airports route, having networks of airports supporting the connections for their people in their countries. What we're proposing is nothing new. In actual fact, if you just think about it for one moment, London today is the best connected city, bar none, anywhere in the world. And it's really on the back of the fact that today we enjoy a network of competing airports. And in my belief, that's the way forward. Now, of course, what I also need to consider is, well, what sort of capacity is required and what level of capacity is required. And to do that, I need to really think about, well, what's happening with airlines and what are the directions that the different airlines are taking, both in Europe but also across the world. And if I look at Gatwick, First of all, the observation I have is Gatwick is quite unique amongst the London airports. And the reason that Gatwick is unique is the fact that Gatwick is the only airport which really serves the various different models of airlines. So if I start for a moment with the legacy carriers, Gatwick has a very strong heritage of serving legacy carriers. Our legacy carriers enable us to connect to long-haul destinations, but also to emerging economies. If you look at the Gatwick business today, 20% of our flights are long-haul flights. We have a very strong long-haul legacy. If you look at the emerging economies, particularly the high-growth emerging economies, then Gatwick today already connects to over half of them. In the last 4 years, we've managed to secure flights to Turkey. We've managed to secure flights and actually transform the accessibility for our people to get to Moscow in Russia. We've secured flights to China. We've secured flights to Vietnam. Later on this year, we secure flights to Indonesia. We've made a lot of progress in reaching out not only to long-haul markets, but also to the emerging economies. But at the same time, if I look at low-cost carriers, then what we've also done is to create Europe's best network of low-cost connectivity through the low-cost carriers that we enjoy. EasyJet is our biggest low-cost carrier, and today, if you look at EasyJet's traffic, 1 in 5 passengers, 20% of their passengers are travelling on business. Business travellers are starting to travel across Europe on the low-cost carriers. And that's a really important point, because if you look at the overwhelming demand of passenger travel in this debate, actually 70% of the market is for journeys to our closest neighbours. 70% of the market is for journeys that go backwards and forwards to our European neighbours. And to service those particular destinations, I would argue strongly that for tomorrow's world, what we're actually looking for are affordable flights, and they're provided by low-cost carriers. But of course, low-cost carriers aren't just stopping at Europe any longer. Bjorn Kuss, who you'll hear from later, is the CEO of Norwegian. And last year at Gatwick, we had the very exciting news that Bjorn is now going to take his low-cost model, which has been very successful at the European level. Actually, Norwegian have become our 3rd largest airline at Gatwick, and he's going to start going global by utilising the latest technology Dreamliner aircraft, which means that in the summer this year, we'll see the return of flights to JFK and also flights across to LA. And I know that Bjorn's already doing flights to Bangkok from the Scandinavian countries. So for us, the unique thing about Gatwick is the fact we can support legacy carriers, we can support charter carriers, and we can support low-cost carriers, and that means we are unique in this debate because we can offer passengers the choice that they demand. Heathrow have priced themselves out already of low-cost flying. So if I now zoom in, let's take a little look at the shortlisted option. At the moment, we're still developing a family of options, looking at a narrow-spaced runway, a mid-spaced runway, and a wide-spaced runway. But I suppose what this chart here really illuminates for me is the fact that Gatwick is to the south of the city. Actually, at the ends of the runways, which is where all of the activity takes place in terms of the landings and takings off, Gatwick is quite sparsely populated. You know, essentially what you see on the chart are the sparsely populated areas at the end of the runways. We need to be very careful and manage noise, particularly very carefully at Gatwick to mitigate the impacts. But fundamentally, noise at Gatwick is not of a similar scale as to what it is at Heathrow. In fact, it's of many orders of magnitudes less than the noise at Heathrow. If you look at the runway proposals, all of the families are for the new runways to go to the south of the existing runway. The one on the screen here is spaced at just over 1 kilometre. But there's nothing too complex about the delivery of this runway. We actually think if Gatwick is selected, that this runway will be delivered. This doesn't involve bridging or tunnelling over the M25. It doesn't involve any changes of reservoirs, and it doesn't involve any changes of railway lines. It's essentially building to the south of the existing facility and putting in additional terminal facilities in between the two runways and utilising the road and rail access that, as I said earlier, is currently being developed. So if I was to sum up Gatwick's case, essentially Gatwick's case is this, and we believe it's a compelling case. Uniquely in this debate, Gatwick supports all different models of airlines. And low cost should not be forgotten about. It's the biggest part of our market. From a noise perspective, we will work tirelessly to try to mitigate the impacts of noise for households that are impacted by noise if a second runway goes ahead at Gatwick. But the 13,800 households that would be impacted at Gatwick are less than 3% of the numbers of households impacted at Heathrow today with their 2 runways. From an air quality point of view, we've already done the modelling, and we know that given our location, not only will we pass the air quality legislative standards today, but we'll also pass them with the second runway. Heathrow breaches them day in, day out today. From a local property impact perspective, our property take is relatively low. Again, we'll be sympathetic, but in terms of our property take, from a residential property perspective, we're talking about 200 properties that we have to carefully manage our way through. Heathrow's property take is of the order of 2,000. If I talk about deliverability, our scheme is relatively straightforward. That doesn't mean it lacks ambition. We haven't built a single runway of full length in the southeast since the 1940s or 50s. So it's still a significant challenge, but it can be delivered, and we believe that if Gatwick is selected, it will be delivered this time around. Cost clearly translates into airport charges, and airport charges enable the various different models to either happen or not, as the case may be. We're challenging ourselves to deliver our scheme at a cost which is close to £5 billion, to keep airport charges at a competitive level and to enable us to continue to serve the different airline models. From a surface access perspective, many of the improvements that are needed for the second runway are already happening or are planned to happen. And from a community perspective, uniquely in this debate, not only do we have our local businesses supporting us, but quite poignantly, we also have West Sussex County Council giving us their in-principle support. That is unique in this debate. Our local communities are giving us strong support. They want to see this development go forwards. So, in summary, we believe that Gatwick is the only deliverable solution. We think we're the progressive choice. We think if Gatwick is decided to be the route forward, we'll offer better connectivity. We'll be better for the UK. We'll be better for passengers. We'll be better for the environment. We'll be better for taxpayers. We'll privately finance the scheme, and we'll be better for the regions. So with that, I think I'll finish and take any questions that I may have from the panel.
Stuart. Can I welcome up our panel again, please? And each time we have the panel, I'll start with a different panel member. So as before, we have 15 minutes of questions from the panel and 5 minutes from the floor, beginning with Simon.
Stuart, thank you very much for that. Connectivity is what I want to explore on behalf of the passenger. At the moment, you're just introducing something called Gatwick Connect, which is basically a pretty clunky form of people connecting from one low-cost airline to another, which is not actually the same as a proper hub airport. So are you ever going to get to the point where actually, if I'm travelling on EasyJet or connecting to another EasyJet flight or to Norwegian or whoever, I can actually have a smooth transfer of the kind that, for example, Heathrow would allow me?
I think, first of all, Simon, I'd start by looking at what is the capability of Gatwick today. In actual fact, we already have transfer baggage facilities in place, built in the existing facilities, that would accommodate up to a third of our passengers transferring through, if that's what passengers wanted to do, if that's what airlines wanted to use the facilities for. They're already built. Historically, they've been there for quite some time. The way in which passengers connect through Gatwick today is not just one model. There are different models. Often we'll see passengers come in on some of the legacy carriers, and they will connect through in an interline sense, similar to what you experience at Heathrow. British Airways would be an example of an airline that would offer those levels of service. If I move across to the low-cost carriers, then typically what's happened to date is that passengers take advantage of the affordable fares and the competitive advantage that we offer through the affordable fares, and what they choose to do is actually self-connect. And I think if you look at how that's now evolving, what Norwegian are doing is actually offering pretty much the same product as BA. So in actual fact, Norwegian are taking their feed network that they've built steadily over the last few years, the European network, and next year they're going to feed that in a true interline sense onto the long-haul Norwegian flights for very affordable fares. So I think there's an array of different ways.
Autocue, please. Sorry, sound, please.
We'll just see if that's working again. So I think there's an array of various different ways within which people can actually transfer through the airport. But what we introduced last year was to help those people who are self-connecting going through. Well, basically, you can come in on the first flight, collect your bag off the carousel, go to a check-in desk.
Coming and going microphone. Let me just take a hand microphone just now, just in case Stuart doesn't want to hold up. Thank you very much.
Colin, you haven't done this, have you? So yeah, so people are coming into the check-in halls, and when they come into the check-in halls, the baggage halls, take the bag, go to a check-in desk in the baggage hall, and then put it on the next flight, whichever carrier that may be. So what we're all about, Simon, is offering choice and different solutions, and this is what you get when you have the freedom, given that you're in separate ownership. I think passengers like it.
I looked at your carbon projections, and they seem to be showing an increase in carbon. Now, we've got a commitment to gross carbon emissions to be no greater than 2005 by 2050. Can you talk us through how you believe you actually meet that, given that you've got projections at the moment which are growing?
Well, certainly at the airport level, we've got a 10-year decade of change plan, which looks at all of the different sustainability issues that we do care passionately about at the airport. If you look at climate change, our challenge is to reduce our carbon footprint by the end of this decade to less than 50% of what it was in 1990. And so far, we've reduced it by 36%. So on the existing facilities, our track record is good, and we think we've got a pathway over the next several years that will see us achieve that target by the end of the decade. In terms of the new runway, then I think this is one of the points that the Commission has really entered into the debate by saying, well, you know, you can't actually, from a passenger point of view, expect to build a runway in Heathrow and a runway in Gatwick because the demand isn't there. But likewise, from a climate change perspective, actually, there isn't the headroom in the emissions to do it either. And therefore, you really do now need to decide at a country level, how are you going to manage the carbon emissions? And from an airport perspective, where are you going to choose to put the next runway? And I think it's really helped to narrow down this debate to, well, is the next runway going to be at Gatwick, where you'll get affordable fares and the minimum environmental impacts possible? Or alternatively, are we going to have a mega hub? For me, there's only one answer.
As a devil's advocate, thinking about surface access, does a bit of hard shoulder running on the motorways and slightly longer Thameslink trains constitute a transformational change in terms of surface access if you're going to move many, many more people from their home to the airport and back again?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, Hugh, we have a track record of success on surface access too. 40% of our passengers get to and from the airport by rail. In actual fact, for staff, the number's not far lower. It's of a very similar order of magnitude. But for us, it's all about demand planning. It's not about iconic projects. It's about systematically looking at what is the commuter demand, which is by far the overwhelming demand, particularly on the rail networks, but also the road. And then layering on top of that the impact progressively over the next 30 or 40 years of the growing Gatwick Airport with 2 runways. And when we do that quite systematically, what we see is what on the surface of it perhaps doesn't sound too iconic, is that the changes that are already in place, adding that additional lane, putting in a 3rd additional capacity on the critical junctions of the M25, putting on a 3rd additional capacity on the spur that goes to the airport, and putting in 12 carriages rather than 8, for example, on the Thameslink, which is actually a 50% increase in the number of seats to and from the airport on the Thameslink. When you add all of that together, it really is quite important, and that will indeed satisfy the demand, not only of the commuter, but also of the air traveller.
What about the solution that is being offered for the Isle of Grain? Actually, there's new ways that people want to travel with their luggage, and the Isle of Grain is offering drop-off points for luggage so that you don't take your luggage to the airport, someone else takes it fast. also park and rides away from the airport?
Well, I think what we've done is just look at the capability of the facilities that we have. Typically, airports such as Gatwick really start up very early in the morning. So our peak flows of traffic are when most people in this room, I imagine, are probably in bed. For us, our day starts from a surface access point of view, probably around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Most people are in bed, sleeping, preparing for the following day. Our first planes actually start to leave the airport at around about 5:30 in the morning. So you need to have been at the airport from 3:30. So one of the reasons why the surface access that I've described works for Gatwick is the fact that the flows of passengers actually come very early in the day. And there's a lot of capacity available early in the day. And that meets the demand. And the most important thing is meeting the demand of passengers. In terms of those other aspects of trying to offer bespoke services to either different airlines or different passengers, for me, that's exactly what competing airports is all about.
Vicky?
Arguably, of course, a number of those transport improvements are paid for by the public and the taxpayer. So, and there are sort of sunk costs for you that you can benefit from. And I wonder the extent to which that's been taken into account, certainly by the Commission, whether that's something that they will need to look at a lot more in the future. But the most important issue that I wanted to raise is that on the other side you have the benefits, and you talk in your various papers about the impact through trade, connectivity and investment. Those, of course, are they apply to everything, to all the other options as well. So they're not sort of unique to Gatwick. And yet, what we heard about the strategic fit of those options is from the Commission, is that the real thing that will change and improve the UK's connectivity and economic benefit of any expansion is developing our hub position a bit more. What we're talking about, nevertheless, with you now, although you hope that there could be some hub operations that decide to locate in Gatwick in the future, it's more point to point. So is it actually solving the critical problems that we heard earlier businesses need, which is a really serious hub airport?
Are you for point to point or hub?
Well, I think what you have to do is look at how world cities operate typically. We're a world city. We should be very proud of a world city. And as a result of being a world city, we have an enormous local demand. What in the industry we call origination and destination demand, O&D demand. People who want to leave the world city and go somewhere because they live here, or people who want to come to our world city. If you look at the number of passengers who travel to and from London through our airports, 90% are O&D passengers. They either get on in London or they get off in London. The overwhelming growth over the last 10 years has come from the low-cost carriers bringing more connectivity at affordable prices across Europe. This is where the development of the market has been. We're predominantly an O&D market. Only 1 in 10 passengers transfers through our airports. For me, this isn't a binary decision. It's not as simple as, is it a mega hub or is it a network of airports? You've got to look at the different proposals and say, can Gatwick's proposal in combination with the other airports, because with Gatwick's proposal you still have Heathrow with its hub services, can that satisfy the connectivity requirements that our population requires going forwards? And for me it can. With our legacy carriers we can reach to the emerging economies. With our legacy carriers we can reach the long haul economies. With our low-cost carriers, they're now starting to move into the long-haul space, but across Europe we can do something with Heathrow can't do, which is to use our low-cost networks to get our people to and from our closest trading partners, where we do by far the most trade at affordable fares, and all to boot with very low environmental impacts. So and that is the Gatwick case.
That's the Gatwick case. But Simon, you come back in that, but I want to ask you a quick question on this, Simon. So basically, with the Gatwick solution, Heathrow remains unchanged.
Well, the interesting thing, if you read the interim report, which I know we've all done very closely, is that they speculate about whether or not Gatwick could attract one of the 3 big alliances. Now, I would suggest that OneWorld is probably quite unlikely to move from Heathrow, which leaves SkyTeam and the Star Alliance. So I'd be interested in that. And also, Kirsty, you very kindly earlier mentioned that I used to clean out Freddie Laker's planes. I also used to frisk people at Gatwick. That was a job, not a hobby. But the big difference then, compared with now, is that you could go to some really interesting places like New York, like Manchester, like Frankfurt, all of which have fallen off the map. And it seems that while Bjorn Kiosk is very kindly going to start 3 services a week from Gatwick to New York in July. Colin Matthews from Heathrow has got 3 services an hour to New York. Just doesn't seem to deliver commercially for the airlines.
I think if you look at Gatwick, Simon, we actually serve more destinations today from the single runway than Heathrow does from its 2. We offer better connectivity in terms of destinations than Heathrow. In terms of the ebb and flow
People
of
want
routes,
to go to New York.
in terms of the ebb and flow of routes coming in and out, we've started to secure in the last 4 years not only services to China, but also to Vietnam, Indonesia, Turkey, Russia, also JFK with Bjorn. You'll hear from him later in terms of his ambitious plans, and of course further afield, Los Angeles. You know, not so long ago, before all of the traffic was routed into Heathrow, Gatwick routinely had 222 weekly flights across to the States. Of course we can support the States, and if we do so, we'll do it with more affordable fares.
And just remind me which alliance you're going to attract out of Star and SkyTeam.
Well, in terms of our case is absolutely not predicated on attracting any of those alliances. For us, this is all about looking into the future and thinking of what the future of aviation holds. It may be that one of the smaller alliances in due course would choose to move down to Gatwick, but for us, our case isn't predicated on that. Fundamentally, we're an O&D market. With the new technologies that are coming in place from an aircraft point of view, that opens up new horizons for more direct flying in the future. And what we will see is a combination in the future of either low-cost carriers, such as Norwegian, actually creating networks that support their own long-haul flights, or in the future, what we'll see are the enormous low-cost networks that we've created at Gatwick in partnership with airlines, particularly EasyJet, starting to feed the long-haul services at the airport. It's not rocket science.
From a delivery perspective, you talked earlier that it's very low risk. You don't have to build over sewage plants, motorways, and all the rest of it. There must be some big residual risks associated with your programme of £5 to £8 billion. What are they, and what would keep you awake at night?
Well, I think when you look at it, the scheme that we've proposed, it falls within the safeguarded land. It's well understood. Frankly, it's not that different to the schemes that were being considered back in 2003 when this whole issue was looked at in quite some detail. So many of the risks are well understood, but fundamentally there are none of those big complications that we see with the different proposals that are competing with us along at Heathrow. Heathrow has to tunnel or bridge the M25 on either of the schemes, as far as we understand them. We haven't got any of those sorts of complications.
Fine.
Some of the Heathrow schemes move into the reservoirs. We haven't got any of those complications. It's a relatively straightforward build, which will offer huge potential to passengers in the future.
Vicky, quick final one.
Of all the proposals, it probably has the least regeneration aspect to it in terms of jobs and what it may do to the region, which is to the locality, if you like, which is interesting in itself. And of course, at the same time, there are extra costs, which mean that you may well have to start raising, unless you expect public subsidy as well, raising what you charge. So can you realistically remain a low-cost carrier as a result? And if you can say something about the impact on the locality, if you like, or the region, and then just talk about what does it mean for you remaining a low-cost carrier, whatever, point to point.
I suppose we don't see ourselves as a low-cost carrier airport. We have low-cost carriers at the airport, and we're very, very proud of them. But we also have legacy carriers and have done for years at the airport. We see ourselves as a very flexible piece of infrastructure. But certainly, as we make the investment going forwards, we're challenging ourselves to privately finance the runway. And that's unique as well, we believe, amongst the different options. And what we would like to do is privately finance the runway and build it in such a way that not only are the charges kept to a level that enables us to continue with the low-cost carriers and the legacy carriers, and our analysis says that can be done, but also provides facilities which actually reach out operationally to those low-cost carriers particularly, that enable the fast turnarounds which are so critical to their business model of flying 3 or 4 rotations every day.
Now, I'd like to pause at this point, because what we're going to do is we're going to thank the panel and Mr. Wingate, and rather than take the audience questions, we're going to take the audience questions for all 3 shortlists at the end of the panel. They'll be on the stage and we'll take a substantial number of questions. So thank you very much indeed.